2 years of COVID put us into Zoom space, and that wasn't fun, in little boxes. But now at least we can see each other and we can look into each other's eyes and through that into each other's souls. And today we're going to have an interesting discussion on a subject that many of you are beginning to contemplate, perhaps because it is so much in the ether, because it is so much the talking point. What are we talking about? We are talking about a book that encapsulates this particular conversation point. It's called The Dharmic Nation, Freeing Bharat, Remaking India. It's been written by Mr. R. Jagannathan, who's sitting to the right of me. It's published by Rupa, and you can purchase this at any leading bookstore. And I would highly recommend that you do, because it has come highly recommended from just about every critic who has set their eyes and read through this. We obviously are discussing ideas in a literature festival, and Mr. Jagannathan, who's been an opinion maker and a journalist, has already grappled with one other big issue, which was jobs. And now, of course, in this particular book, he attempts to grapple with another fundamental idea. What is our nationhood? How should we describe ourselves? Where does secularism fit in with our concept of a dharmic civilization? Is dharma to be confused with religion? Many people in the West and those who call themselves Indologists have often conflated the two terms. His book not only tells us that this is not quite the meaning that is intended as it is studied in the West, but also it breaks down certain preconceived notions of what is Hindutva and a Hindu Rashtra. But first things first, let's talk to Mr. Jagannathan and our esteemed panel that has already been introduced to all of you, and I don't see a better collection of minds to discuss this issue. Mr. Jagannathan, a dharmic nation, according to you, is not a theocratic state. It's not a religious state. Can you explain why? Because everyone conflates dharma with religion.
Before I start, let me also say, part of the inspiration for the book came from Pavan Verma's book, The Great Hindu Civilization, which I read and interviewed him about. A lot of my thoughts also congealed after I read that, and many other authors. The point of dharma, broadly, which means that which upholds or which supports, is not really about religion. It's about sustaining a larger cosmic balance at the largest level, and at the smallest level, it means sustaining divergence and this diversity without us having to slaughter one another. Now, this idea that if I am right, you have to be wrong, is entirely a non-dharmic concept. In dharma, the opposite of black is not white. It is often not black. So there are a variety of responses in dharma. And one of the conference theme, one word, many words. It's actually a different way of saying ekam sat vipra bahudha vadanti. A same thought might come in different ways. So dharma is about accepting diversity as the norm and making sure that everybody lives according to his or her own ideals, but in a live and let live fashion. So dharma is what defines our nation. Before that, I'll say two other points. The reason why I even thought that we need to define our nationhood is because we are not a republic created in 1947, nor are we a product of just the constitution thought up by the best minds we had in the late 40s. It is actually the reason why we are still a democracy and all the remaining places in South Asia are not really democracies, is because the thought that we must live with diversity preceded the birth of modern India in 1947. So that is what we need to celebrate. And for us, we need to define, are we defined by a constitution where we borrowed ideas, no doubt the best ideas from the world, from Irish constitution, American constitution, French constitution, German constitution. So then I asked myself, really, what is Indian about this constitution? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the constitution. It's a wonderful constitution. Does it come from the soul that is India? Which I don't know whether it does or encapsulate. If it does, you don't need 145,000 words to write a constitution for India, because a simpler thing, dharma as a way of life, as a way of accommodating differences, is certain to keep us together, because everybody has to uphold dharma, no matter what religion you belong to, what caste or creed you belong to, because dharmo rakshati rakshita. The idea of the civilization, that's more important. That it happens, most of the civilization is in South Asia, is what makes us one. But unfortunately in 1947 it became two different civilizations. One civilization trying to project itself more as the West Asian one. What is left is what is the Dharmic civilization. But we need to include them at some point. I don't know how. But I think primarily if all religions accept the idea that we have to live together, we have to accept differences, and we have to uphold dharma, which is not religion, but a larger balance between differing ideologies. That is what we need to define ourselves.
Mr. Verma, of course, you've written an epic just a few years ago, during the height of the lockdown, where you have spoken about how many people grate against the idea of conflating Hindu dharma, and they chafe at it, suggesting that it has a religious connotation and therefore it shouldn't apply to our sense of nationhood. First of all, who are these people? Why did they do this? And why do you think it is compatible actually with our sense of nationhood?
Thank you, Rahul, and let me first congratulate Mr. Jagannathan for his book, because it opens up the possibility of debate. We are a dialogic civilization. The Upanishads were a dialogue, the Gita is a dialogue, the Brahma Sutra also always admits the opponent's point of view. So we are a dialogic civilization, and it's time to discuss this. My book, The Great Hindu Civilization, deals with dharma. But it was written primarily because I believe there were some people who, in order to legitimately recognize the verifiable achievements of ancient India, automatically conflated it with glorification of Hinduism, and therefore something which is against secularism. And I don't agree with that point of view. I think history must be told truthfully. I believe some of the peaks of refinement of a great civilization, because we are a young nation but an ancient civilization which goes back to the dawn of time, need to be recognized. Dharma is not religion. Dharma can be religion, but in the Hindu mind as it involved, dharma is, as Jagannathan ji said, it comes from the root word dhra, which means to support, to uphold, to sustain. And its meaning variably is code of conduct, duty, virtue, goodness, right action, piety, law, custom, compassion. That's broadly the notion of it. Now, the word dharma is a very ancient one. It goes back to the Rig Veda. It's there in the Dharma Shastras, which were again written BCE. It is there in the Dharma Sutras, and quite importantly in the Manusmriti. In the Yaksha Prashna of the Mahabharata, the Yaksha asks Yudhishthira, what is dharma? And Yudhishthira, this is the most brilliant, one of the most brilliant parts of the Mahabharata. Ashwin has done much more work than me on it. But Yudhishthira says, you cannot, neither reason nor sacred text nor an authoritative sage has absolutely defined dharma. The meaning of dharma is hidden in a cave. And when Draupadi confronts him that how could you allow the adharm of one woman married to 5 men? Yudhishthir, who is the eldest, says, Draupadi, dharma is sukshma, subtle. This pleases me, so it must be right. In other words, this is a very sophisticated concept in Hinduism. We are a dharmic civilization, but we are not a unidimensional religious state.
Mr. Sanghi, let me continue this conversation forward, and I'll come to you also, Sudheendra ji. Mr. Sanghi, the fundamental question that I want to pose now, after hearing the two introductory statements, is simple. If our civilization is supported or undergirded by dharma, if our Hindu civilization is undergirded by dharma, which is actually a large rubric, a framework of normative assumptions and practices which make us ethical, then obviously Hindu ethos is integral to preserving our sense of secularism.
Of course.
Can you explain why?
So I'm so glad that you asked me that question, Rahul, because
because fundamentally,
yes,
when you associate
absolutely.
the Hindu ethos with secularism, people say, but how can you do that?
How can you do that? But this is the point, that when you talk of the ethos, it is a no formula. And that's so wonderful about the moment you get into Sanatan Dharm. I mean, today, for example, as against, let's say, an Abrahamic view, which is there is one true God, and if you don't worship that true God, then in that case you are damned to hellfires. Here you can have 33 kotis of deities. You can have the Buddha being worshipped as the 9th avatar of Vishnu. You could have Christ being accommodated on the facade of a Hindu temple. Or for example, you could have a figure of Nanak, or a figure of Sai Baba, or a figure of Christ or Mahavir in your puja, and you will instinctively bow down your head because you know that all faiths are path to that same divine. You could see the path to enlightenment as yantra, tantra or mantra, and all of them are equally acceptable. You could be astic, nastic, tantric, spiritualistic, ritualistic, or simply fantastic. And all of those are acceptable views. You can be Shaivite or Vaishnavite. You could worship Shakti or Bhakti. You could consider the path to be Artha, Kama, Dharma, Moksha. You can worship a stone, a statue, a cow, a monkey. You could worship a river, a mountain, the sun, the moon, and all of them are legitimate forms of worship. You may call a stone a shivling, and I will call that shivling a stone. Both of us are welcome. We are both accepted into the norm. So in that sense, the Upanishadic ideal of Vasudeva Kutumbakam is perfectly illustrated in what we have going in our country. And that is where I think to a certain extent we do need to preserve this, and we need to understand where it came from. That I seem to agree with both Mr. Verma as well as Mr. Jaggi, that honestly speaking, did we come into existence in 1947? Did all of this happen in 1947 as a result of Constitution? In fact, as far as I know, please correct me if I'm wrong, the original Constitution did not have the word secular in it. So were in some ways Ambedkar and Nehru mistaken in terms of omitting that particular word? It was introduced in the 1970s during the emergency years. To my mind, it was actually an implicit and tacit acknowledgement of the fact that we are a dharmic nation and we have a dharmic ethos, and therefore in that sense the majority will be fair with the minority. That's the way at least I look at it.
That's a very important point, Sudheendra ji. And now, you have worked with former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji. And in 1988, during Savarkar's birth anniversary, Vajpayee ji said, and I quote him, "At a fundamental level, India is a Hindu nation. For me, Hindu nation and Indian nation are synonyms." Vajpayee ji also said, and I quote, "Savarkar envisioned a state that does not distinguish between citizens based on religion and worship. He spoke of a state that treats all equally, but Savarkar said the nation will be a Hindu nation. There is a difference between nation, Rashtra, and state, Rajya, and this difference must be explicit," unquote. Now, so if there is a clear distinction between the Hindu nation and a Hindu state, Rashtra and Rajya, why resist a Hindu Rashtra? Why, when the RSS talks about it, when Mohan Bhagwat defines it in a civilizational term, does it still elicit a degree of derision?
Let me begin by congratulating Jagannath ji for writing this book, which, as Pavan ji has said, contributes to a very important debate. Not having read the book, I can't comment on the book, but you made a very important point by saying that Dharma does not mean that I am right and you are wrong. There are many sides to a truth, and our rishis also have acknowledged it. Ekam sat vipraha bahudha vadanti. You are also right in saying that India did not come into existence in 1947. It's a civilizational nation, although 1947 is a very important stage in the evolution of the nation which should not be belittled. The evolution of our civilization has happened by accepting and integrating many influences, both within and also without. And therefore, to say that this civilization, or to, I don't know whether you said it because I have not read it, but to think or to say that this is India's civilization is a Hindu civilization is wrong. Because in course of time, our civilization has internalized influences that came from outside. And right from the days of our rishis, the Rig Veda says, "Let noble thoughts come to us from all sides." We have never closed our doors and windows. So Islam came, Christianity came, Zoroastrianism came, and they're all part of India. And therefore, Indian civilization should not be equated with Hindu civilization in the narrow sense of the term Hindu. Hindu Rashtra. You ask a question. Again, it comes to the same logic. If by Hindu Rashtra we mean Hindu, if you mean Hindu as a religion, as a panth, then Hindu Rashtra must be opposed. It is against our civilization and it's against our constitution. Hindu, the word Hindu itself, it connoted at a certain point in time a place on earth where a certain civilization arose and evolved, and which welcomed spiritual traditions, cultural traditions from all over the world. So if Hindu Rashtra, in Hinduism is different from Hindu culture, Hindu tradition. We are making a big mistake by conflating Hindu religion, that is Hindu panth, which itself is a agglomeration of many panths, with religion, and then religion associating it with nation. Let's not make the mistake that Pakistan made. Pakistan called itself an Islamic nation, and see what has happened to Pakistan. Violence in the name of Islam that is perpetrated on Muslims themselves. Intercaste, intersect violence. You mean to say that if India declares itself Hindu Rashtra in the sense of Hinduism as a religion, we are going to see a similar civil war in India? The number of non-Hindus in the religious sense is not insignificant. Neither Muslims are insignificant in number, nor Christians are insignificant in number. Forget Muslims and Christians. Six don't accept. In fact, they don't accept that we are part of Hinduism. And now if India calls itself a Hindu Rashtra, can you even imagine the kind of problems we are going to face? So why this insistence that India should be called a Hindu Rashtra or declared a Hindu Rashtra? What is there in the constitution which is coming in the way of realizing the ideals of our constitution? There is nothing that really obstructs any government, whether it's a BJP government or a Congress government or a socialist government, that obstructs that government from realizing the basic concepts, the basic ideals of justice, equality, fraternity, and national unity. And therefore, with all, the RSS is doing a lot of good work. But the one very wrong thing the RSS is doing is insisting that India is a Hindu Rashtra. Now, coming to the Dharmic, Dharmic nation, Dharmic Rajya, Dharma Rajya, if Dharma is understood not as a denominational religion, not as an identity-based term, but as a set of principles, ethical, normative guidelines, then Dharma has always nourished our civilization. Let me, Rahulji, there's a concept of Dharma Rajya in our civilization long before India became a democracy. It did not mean that there was only despotism, there was only tyranny for thousands of years. Even when India was ruled by kings, there was a certain dharmic concept of how the state should be. So dharmic nation in this sense is not contradictory to secular nation. Our secularism is not anti-religion, it's not anti-dharma. So, Rahulji, the biggest, we are having this conversation, it's not an academic conversation. We are having this conversation at a time when minorities in India are feeling insecure in an unprecedented way. In this very city, the national capital, thousands of people are taking morchas and openly calling for violence against Muslims. Is the judiciary following its dharma? Are the police following their dharma? Is the Home Ministry following the dharma? Is the Prime Minister following the dharma? That is a question that we all should be discussing today.
Okay, well, that's a more political question.
No, but that's very relevant.
It may be. Maybe in another platform. I completely agree to you. But let's talk about it. Okay, fair enough. Let's not run away from it. So let me bring you back onto the subject, which we can easily sort of conflate his views with what you have said. Now, you have said that you're in favor of the word secular, for example, being removed from the preamble. You also sort of written that perhaps we, as a shibboleth, we have begun to internalize impractically the Vasudeva Kutumbukum philosophy. You have said that Savarkar, who defined Hindu as someone who considered India as both Pitrabhu and Punyabhu, is a Hindu. Many have said this excludes Muslims and Christians, as Sudheendra Kulkarni is saying. But not many know that his idea of a state meant equal rights to all and the right to freely practice one's faith. I think both of you have sort of talked about the latter, Savarkar and his evolution of his thought in your book. his state did not have a religious identity. You say Savarkar more or less got it right. That's one of the chapters of your book. What do you mean by this? Because someone like Sudheendra Kulkarni would say that when you use the word Punya Bhumi, holy land, then by definition you are excluding a large number of people.
No, actually it's not. So let me first come to the points of difference with Sudheendra ji and probably to some extent with Pavan ji also. We are not a secular nation. Secular nation. We have followed what we thought were secular principles for the last 70, 75 years. And we have shown that secularism is a dud. The point is, if everybody is unhappy, from the minorities to the majority or whatever you want to call, I mean so-called minority and a so-called majority, for the simple reason Hinduism is not one big mass that equals 79-80% of this country. They are a group of their own sampradayas, their own traditions, practices. Hinduism varies. Every 100 kilometers you have a different kind of Hinduism. So it depends on lots of factors and not on scripture. Though we all accept some commitment to Shrutis like Vedas, but different, I mean we have had all kinds of Hindu messengers all through the ages from various parts, from Shankara to Ramanujacharya to Chaitanya Deva to Kabir to Tulsidas to the Bhakti movement guys to Narayana Guru. There has been no short of Hindu messengers who have all given the message in different ways, in their own context. Okay, so at a fundamental level I have no issue because Hindu is not defined by religion, it is defined by the geography, and no less a person than somebody outside like a Diana X says, India is a sacred geography. It is defined by the sense that this nation was not created by some king deciding that this is my territory, this is me. It was decided by the footprints of pilgrims running all over the place, right? They created the sense of India. So in that sense, we are a Dharmic nation. If you, I would now don't have I don't think there's any difference between Hindu Rashtra and this thing. Even the constitution, when it uses the word Hindu, it says it includes Jains, Buddhists, Sikhs. First remove that if you think it is not true. Secondly, I believe that the Dharmic concept stands on 4 basic pillars and 100 other smaller traditions. And these pillars include the religious part of Hinduism, Sikhism, Jainism and Buddhism. All 4 are central pillars of Dharma because all of them act on the basis of what they believe is Dharma. So it is common to them. And the smaller traditions. I mean, you could have a Basava or anybody, a Ramakrishna mission or whatever it is. Each of them has created their own sense of Dharma. So hundreds of traditions have defined Dharma. And if you look at it, we are not a secular nation because secularism was a dud imported from the West. They meant something else, but it has not worked even for them. The minute the composition of their population changed from purely a narrow monoculture of, say, Nordic countries are having riots today. Okay? In Britain, you are having riots today. And what is Britain? It's not even a secular nation because the king is head of both the church and the thing. The Vatican, which is a member of the UN, is both a church and a state. If you look at the US, theoretically their First Amendment said that they are different. They will not allow the establishment of religion or its free exercise thereof. Okay, so theoretically they are a secular nation. But what do you see imprinted on every dollar? In God we trust. So they are not a secular nation in any sense. So, and what do they have? They have an organization called the USCIRF. What is it? It is to impose a Protestant view on the rest of the world. And what is USCIRF? It is not applicable to US, by the way. They are not allowed to operate on US soil. It's a State Department, has a membership there. They are supposed to judge freedom of religion in every other part of the world except their own. Right? So look at the hypocrisy involved in this. So my point is, one thing, secularism is not the right thing. Right word, if at all, closest in religion, or not religion, in language, English languages, to call it pluralism or diversity. That is the way we describe ourselves. Second thing, the reason why I do also say that Hindu Rashtra is not a bad idea, provided, of course, others may not agree with it, they can accept the concept of a Dharmic nation. I mean, that is more inclusive, I am okay with that. The reason why I say is that every civilization must have some kind of a guarantor state. And this, the penny dropped for me 2 years ago when India, being an allegedly secular nation, was trying to do something for minorities in the larger South Asian region, and immediately it was conflated as anti-Indian minorities, right? So what you're saying is that India cannot even stand for protecting its own Hindus. What has happened? Pakistan, you know the state of Hindus. You know Pakistan, in Afghanistan, the state of Hindus and Sikhs, not a single fellow is left there. In Bangladesh, over the last 50 years, Hindu population has fallen from 22% after the first census, that is after post-partition, to 8 or 9% today. And obviously, we are not able to protect any of them. And if we do not stand as a guarantee to the world, today there are 100 Christian majority nations, 100 plus, 50 plus Muslim majority nations. If anything goes wrong with Hindus, or Christians or Muslims in India, the whole world is willing to stand up and say you are doing wrong. But who is willing to stand up for saying that you're doing wrong when somebody bashes Hindus? You're just seeing temples being vandalized in Australia, in Canada. Those are the things that are happening. We are not able to stand up because we say we are secular, so we can't talk about Hindus. So what is the point in this Hinduism that ultimately means that you can protect everybody else, you can talk for Palestine, but you cannot talk for Hindus. This is our nationalism, which is bunkum. I am sorry to use strong words. We need to be able to stand up for what is right, even among Hindus. But nobody is willing to do so.
Mr. Verma, this is very interesting because you talk about Hindutva, for example. Now we talk about the all-embracing nature of the Hindu way, the Hindu view, forget about the way, Hinduness. But we have a problem with something that has emerged from within, a Hindutva. It's another strand. You can accept atheists, you can accept Bhakti tradition, you can accept Shakti tradition, Vaishnava, but not Hindutva tradition. What does that tell you? Is there an intrinsic bias, or are we fearing the assertion of our Hinduness?
First of all, I think I'd like to respond to what Mr. Jagannathan has said. I am the first person to recognize that the implementation of the principles of secularism have been compromised with. There have been cases of minority appeasement for vote bank politics. And today we have enough evidence to show that majoritarian politics of Hinduism are being used again for vote bank politics. But because there is misuse, I am not prepared to throw the baby out with the bathwater to say that a country like ours will be called a Hindu Rashtra not in its civilizational sense of being a Dharmic nation, but in its narrow interpretation of one religion is supreme in India. Because I draw inspiration against this idea not only from the constitution, but from among the principles of Hinduism itself. It was quoted here, Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti. The truth is one. Wise people call it by different names. It was said thousands of years ago and is a Mahavakya. Ano Bhadra Kritavo Yantu Vishvata. Let good thoughts flow to me from all directions. This was said at a time when societies were still establishing themselves for the first time, and in most other societies the approach was, no, excesses are committed in the name of religion by the extremists in all religions. I believe we have been the victims of Islamic terrorism. I believe there are fanatics perhaps within Christianity. I believe that within Hinduism also we have an ultra-right which believes that any other religion is not worthy of respect. My view is that when you speak of a Hindu Rashtra, जगन्नाथन साहब आप तो उसको उस तरह से बोलते हैं कि इस देश में 80% हिंदू हैं, उनकी रक्षा करना जरूरी है और उनकी संस्कृति और उनकी सांस्कृतिक विरासत को हमें एक बार फिर से सुदृढ़ करना है और उसको याद भी करना है. That's why I wrote my book. History cannot be glossed over. But do you know that the interpretation of what you are saying at a philosophical level, at the local level, is an actual imposition of one religion only as against the other? The point I am making is, let us not today reduce this republic, which is also a great civilization, and a great civilization which for millennia was Hindu, into a unidimensional, straight-jacketed, exclusionist force, because I believe for pragmatic reasons alone it will divide India. We have the third largest number of Muslims in the world. Even the 2% Christians in our country are greater than the population of Hungary and Greece. And incidentally, people of different faiths are not living in geographically isolated areas. If 25% of Kerala is Muslim, 30% of West Bengal is Muslim. 20% of UP is, 18% of Bihar is, 14% of Karnataka is, 12% of Tamil Nadu is. We live cheek by jowl together. Therefore, it is even more important that we become a Dharmic nation, whereby we learn the principles that I spoke about, the 10 lakshan, tolerance, compassion, the ability for kshama. These are our strengths, and this is our unique calling card to the world.
Let me bring in Mr. Sanghi on this. Let's also accept that it can't just be the onus of Hindus to uphold our open, tolerant culture. Look, we have states, for example, the United Kingdom. It defines itself as an Anglican country. It is multicultural.
Absolutely.
There are problems. Mr. Jagannathan and some others have said that if you remove the word secular from the preamble, it doesn't make us communal.
Absolutely.
Because our ethos is assimilative, the Hindu larger ethos. And we ourselves are beyond being sort of given a larger group identity. We're so divided. There are castes, there's varna, there's jati, there's all sorts of things. So we don't actually react in a manner that makes us, in the Abrahamic sense,
A monolith.
a monolith. So given all of that, are we over-amplifying the fringe here and the concerns that arise from it, the Bajrang Dals, or call it what you want to, and leaving the onus totally on the Hindus to maintain the status quo?
See, Rahul, honestly, my view has always been that if you think in terms of Sanatan Dharm, it is the ultimate form of liberalism. Honestly speaking, if I look at myself today, I think I consider myself to be a liberal, even though that has become a politically charged word. I consider myself to be a liberal because I'm a Hindu. And in that sense, the way I see it is that, unfortunately, to a certain extent, over the centuries, Abrahamic ideology has attempted to impose a singular truth on a plural world. And we can't shy away from that. This absolutism, coupled with expansionism and conversion, has wreaked havoc on many, many civilizations. And we should not forget that. Zoroastrian culture was completely wiped out from Iran. The Mithraic cults of Rome do not exist today. Egypt's Ra, Osiris, and Isis don't exist anymore in the common perception of Egyptians. Where are Zeus and Apollo of the Greeks? No one worships them anymore. The tribal belief systems of the Australian Aboriginals was completely wiped out. The Incas and the Aztecs don't have their gods anymore. So the point is that most pre-Abrahamic belief systems could not withstand the assault of Abrahamic thought. And Hinduism in that sense is amongst the very few pre-Bronze Age civilizations to have withstood it. So the point is that we also now we need to not only preserve the Dharmic ethos, which is essentially pluralism, but we also need to preserve the civilizational ethos. And I think to a certain extent we have started becoming a little too nitpicky. So for example, does the King of England, also being the head of the Church of England, make England a less secular country? Or for example, the US President holding the national prayer breakfast, does that make America a less secular country? Or for example, if you have, let's say, the French government deciding to spearhead the restoration of the Notre Dame Cathedral after its burning down, does that the French wear secularism as a badge of honor? But does it make the French less secular? Or for example, religious education is considered to be a primary pillar within the German education system. Does that make Germany less secular? So I think this, sorry to say, this word secularism has been bandied about, and I think it has long outlived its expiry date, frankly. Those who believe that Indian secularism is all about that so-called Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb, as it were, well, I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud about the fact that for every Bhimsen Joshi, we also have a Zakir Hussain. For every Vikram Sarabhai, we have an APJ Abdul Kalam. That's wonderful. That's what we love about India and Bharat. But ask yourself, why did that Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb not take root in Bangladesh? Why did it not take root in Pakistan? After all, we were all the same country, no?
Or Kashmir.
Or Kashmir. So the point is, I think somewhere Hinduism is now saying that, listen, I am by nature liberal, but I'm no longer going to be liberal to illiberal ideas. Period.
I think that's a good point, Mr. Kulkarni. Would you at least concede, in the final analysis, we're running out of time, that at the very least our secularism has been lopsided, it has tended towards minorityism?
In the practice of secularism, certain parties, and let's name the parties because without that the meaning doesn't become clear. It's the Congress party and other parties that call themselves secular. They practiced Muslim appeasement. And which is why secularism has become unacceptable to those who are really secular. But that doesn't mean that because there was some appeasement and because there was some compromise with secularism, the word secularism itself, the concept of secularism, the ideal of secularism itself should be jettisoned. If you say that we are now not going to be liberal to illiberal people and we are also going to be illiberal, and taking pride in the fact that we want to be illiberal, we want to imitate Pakistan, we want to imitate Saudi Arabia, then we are doing grave injustice to Hinduism. That's why I want to reiterate this point. Let's look at what Pakistan has done to itself. It's a big lesson to India, to Indian Muslims. Indian Muslims should introspect because many of them supported partition in 1947. Are we going to imitate they call themselves Muslim Rashtra, therefore we want to call ourselves Hindu Rashtra? Hinduism, in the true Dharmic sense, is a great religion. And that's why we must always, the title of this debate, who fears a Dharmic nation? Nobody should fear a Dharmic nation. Dharma is supreme. And therefore, and again, Jagannathan ji, you mentioned, Hinduism, Sikhism, Jainism, these are dharma. Is Islam not a dharma? Is Christianity not a dharma? Is Zoroastrianism not a dharma? They also have a dharmic concept. No. I want to say this, that let us therefore accept that all people who live in India are Indians. They are our brothers. They are our sisters, irrespective of their religion. And let us go back to the true dharmic understanding of dharma. In his autobiography, Mahatma Gandhi says, towards the end, he says, "It is my devotion to truth that drew me towards politics." And I want to emphasize that those who say that religion has nothing to do with politics, that is, dharma has nothing to do with politics, they do not understand the meaning of dharma. Today, the real issue, the real challenge before Hindu society is inequality, is poverty, is unemployment. The majority of Hindus today are facing the problem of poverty and steep inequality, which is increasing, which is widening. So let's tackle those problems.
Okay.
Instead of bringing in this absolutely useless, meaningless, and even dangerous debate on removing secularism from our constitution, changing the constitution, making Hindu Rashtra, it's not necessary.
Well, it's one point of view. Very quickly, your response. We are ending this, and I'll make the case for Hinduism light.
What do you mean?
Yeah, two things. One is, I'll leave 2-3 questions first. I think that Indian Islam needs to be different from global Islam for the simple reason, if they asked what Bhishma said, you talk about dharma and what is not dharma. This is a question that Indian Muslims need to ask themselves, what is their dharma relative to this message. Secondly, you say Hindu Rashtra is not a great idea to alienate. By that yardstick, I would say Gandhi's Ram Rajya would have equally alienated thousands of people, though he interpreted it in his own way. But in the masses did not interpret it the way he interpreted it. So you can say, you may say it in some way, but the Bajrang Dal may do it in different way. Last thing I mean by, Hinduism has always had missionaries, but our missionaries were not of the converting type. What we mean is that, like everybody thought his duty was to give his latest new great idea, whether it is a Shankara or who had a marginal descent in Ramanujacharya or anybody else. They had great ideas and they wanted to convey ideas. But the Abrahamic religions believed in the idea of converting. That is, they believe in a binary, that if you are not in my religion, then you are against me. This is the George Bush statement when he went for his wars, right? If you are not with me, then you are against me, is the basic problem with Abrahamic religions. My solutions for both are two simple things. One, in matters of history, we all agree the background. We need a Truth, History and Reconciliation Commission that publishes the truth and then say, okay, let's move forward after establishing the thing. The second thing we must do is, I think we must encourage our Muslim brothers and Christians to think less about conversion and think more about integration, and their philosophy must be attuned with the Dharmic idea, not Hinduism, but the Hindu way of life, which is about accepting differences. So the minute you concentrate on conversions and all, you are actually going to destroy society. Well, tell me which religion will accept that you are going to lose a lot of your customs and practices, because another fellow is just going to translate you. I mean, you are creating problems by conversion technologies which are dangerous.
Very quickly, sir.
You know what Jagannathan Sahib is saying? I think we are all in broad agreement. We are a Dharmic nation, but we cannot become an illiberal nation because it's against our ethos and against our interests. But what we say must be prevented from misinterpretation by those who are taking us to disaster. And I have a small couplet to end this discussion. Dil se to har muamla, दिल से तो हर मुआमला करके चले थे साफ हम, जैसे जगन्नाथन साहब, कहने में उनके सामने बात बदल गई. So what changes in its implementation should be carefully examined at its inception.
Yeah, thank you.
Rahul, just one last point, that Hindu temples need to be freed.
Okay, well, I need to, sir, please.
We cannot have 4 lakh temples under government control.
Yes, well, our dharma...
Equitable is part of Dharmic.
Well, sir, you made your point. Being dharmic also means that you're open to all ideas, and I think we have been all very open to all the ideas that have been presented here, and that is also our dharma. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much.